The metal detector remained silent as Marcus Williams stepped through TSA screening at Atlanta's busiest airport. Agent Derek Kowalski watched from his supervisor station, 12 years of professional instincts, telling him the young black man with expensive headphones was trouble. The kid's calm demeanor during questioning only confirmed Kowalski's suspicions. When Marcus mentioned his father worked for TSA, Kowalski's mockery was swift and decisive. "Sure he does, kid." Hours later, sitting in the sterile detention room he'd thrown Marcus into, Kowalski would finally understand his fatal error as Director James William, head of the TSA, walked into the room. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Marcus Williams adjusted his headphones as he navigated through the maze of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, his rolling suitcase trailing behind him like a faithful companion. The familiar chaos of travelers rushing to gates, the constant announcements echoing through the terminal, and the smell of overpriced coffee created a symphony he'd grown to appreciate. At 16, he'd already accumulated more frequent flyer miles than most adults, thanks to his father's demanding travel schedule and his own academic commitments. "Excuse me, young man," called out a Delta Gate agent as Marcus passed by Terminal B. "You dropped this." She held up his boarding pass, which must have slipped from his jacket pocket. Marcus smiled and jogged back to retrieve it. "Thank you so much. I would have been in serious trouble without this." "Chicago, huh? Business or pleasure?" she asked, noting his destination. "Academic conference. I'm presenting a research project on cybersecurity at the National High School Science Competition." Marcus's face lit up with pride. "My computer science teacher says it's a great opportunity to network with college recruiters." The agent's eyebrows raised, impressed. "Wow, that's fantastic. Good luck with your presentation." Marcus thanked her and quickened his pace. He pulled out his phone to check his schedule. The opening ceremony started at 6, giving him plenty of time to settle into his hotel and review his notes. His father had wanted to accompany him, but Director Williams was stuck in Washington, dealing with some crisis at TSA headquarters. He paused near a Starbucks to send a quick text to his father. "About to go through security. Flight's on time. I'll call you when I land." The response came quickly. "Proud of you, son. Remember what we practiced about your presentation. You've got this. Love you." Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of his father's support. Director Williams had been skeptical when Marcus first got interested in cybersecurity, worried about his teenage son poking around in sensitive digital territories. But when Marcus's high school project on airport security vulnerabilities caught the attention of his teachers, his father's concern transformed into genuine pride. A family with young children struggled past him, the parents juggling car seats, diaper bags, and boarding passes while trying to corral 2 toddlers. Marcus stepped aside to give them more room, remembering his own family trips when he was younger, back when his mother was still alive, and airport adventures were shared experiences rather than solo journeys. "First time flying?" he asked the frazzled mother, noting her nervous expression. "Is it that obvious?" she laughed. "We're visiting my parents in Denver. The kids have never been on a plane. You'll do fine. Just remember to bring snacks and download some movies on your tablet. The altitude might bother their ears during takeoff and landing. Have them chew gum or drink something." "Thank you, honey. You're very kind." Marcus continued toward the security checkpoint, feeling good about the small interaction. His father always said that airports revealed people's true character. Some became impatient and rude under stress, while others found opportunities to help and connect. It was ironic, Marcus thought, that his research project focused on the same security systems his father oversaw nationally. The TSA checkpoint loomed ahead, with its familiar maze of stanchions and multiple screening lanes. Marcus joined the shortest line, automatically organizing his belongings according to the routine he'd perfected over dozens of flights. laptop in one bin, shoes and belt in another, phone and wallet in his jacket pocket to avoid losing them. He watched the TSA agents methodically processing travelers, their movements efficient and practiced. Most interactions were brief and professional. Scan boarding pass, check ID, wave through the metal detector, collect belongings. The system worked smoothly when everyone knew their role. A business traveler ahead of him grumbled about removing his shoes, complaining loudly about the inconvenience to anyone who would listen. Marcus silently shook his head, remembering his father's advice about traveling with dignity and patience. "The agents are just doing their job," Director Williams had explained. "Treat them with respect, follow procedures, and everything goes smoothly." As the line moved forward, Marcus noticed a TSA supervisor watching the screening process from an elevated platform. The man's badge read Kowalski, and his expression seemed perpetually stern, scanning each passenger with the intensity of someone looking for trouble. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus offered a polite nod before looking away. The family with young children from earlier was struggling in the next line over, their toddlers crying as parents frantically tried to organize their belongings. Marcus wished he could help, but knew better than to leave his position in line or interfere with the security process. His phone buzzed with a text from his presentation partner back in Atlanta. "Break a leg tomorrow. Your slides look amazing. The judges won't know what hit them." Marcus quickly typed back, "Thanks, nervous but excited. This could change everything for college applications." "Next," called the TSA agent at the document check station. Marcus stepped forward, boarding pass and driver's license ready, completely unaware that his routine flight to Chicago was about to become anything but routine. Development 1. Marcus handed his boarding pass and license to the TSA agent at the document checkpoint. The agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, scanned both documents and compared the photo to his face. "Chicago for business or pleasure?" she asked routinely. "Academic conference. I'm presenting a research project on cybersecurity." "That's impressive for someone your age. Good luck with your presentation." She handed back his documents with a smile. "Have a safe flight." Marcus moved toward the security screening area, placing his belongings in the gray plastic bins with practiced efficiency. His laptop went into a separate bin, his shoes and belt into another. He kept his phone and wallet in his jacket pocket as he approached the metal detector. From his elevated supervisor station, Agent Derek Kowalski watched the flow of passengers with the calculating gaze of a predator selecting prey. 12 years on the job had taught him to spot troublemakers, and something about the young black kid in the expensive headphones triggered his instincts. Too confident, too comfortable, too well-dressed for a teenager traveling alone. The kid moved through the line with the ease of a frequent flyer, which struck Kowalski as suspicious. Where does a 16-year-old get money for regular air travel? The expensive electronics, the designer backpack, the casual way he handled airport procedures. It all added up to something that didn't sit right. Marcus stepped through the metal detector without incident, the machine remaining silent as he raised his arms and waited for clearance. He moved to collect his belongings from the conveyor belt, reaching for his laptop bin first. "Sir, please step aside for additional screening," called Agent Sarah Mitchell from behind the scanning station. She was young, maybe 28, with blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. Her tone was professional, but not unkind. Marcus paused, slightly surprised. "Is there a problem with something?" "Just routine additional screening. Please step over here." Sarah gestured toward a secondary screening area off to the side. Kowalski descended from his platform, his movements deliberate and authoritative. He'd seen enough to confirm his suspicions. The kid's surprise seemed forced, too practiced. In Kowalski's experience, innocent people didn't ask questions when selected for additional screening. "I'll handle this one, Mitchell," Kowalski said, his badge clearly identifying him as a supervisor. He studied Marcus with unconcealed scrutiny. "Empty your pockets completely and place everything in this bin." Marcus complied, removing his phone, wallet, and a small pack of gum. "I'm not sure why I was selected. I passed through the metal detector fine." "Random additional screening is standard procedure," Kowalski replied, though his tone suggested nothing random about it. "What's the purpose of your travel?" "Academic conference in Chicago. I'm presenting a research project." Kowalski's eyes narrowed. The kid's story was too convenient, too rehearsed. A teenager presenting at academic conferences? Traveling alone with expensive equipment? Every instinct told him something was off. "What kind of research?" Kowalski pressed, beginning to examine Marcus's belongings more thoroughly than necessary. "Cybersecurity. Specifically, vulnerabilities in airport security systems." Marcus answered honestly, not realizing how his words would be interpreted. The response hit Kowalski like confirmation of his worst suspicions. A young black male claiming to research airport security vulnerabilities, traveling alone with expensive electronics, too comfortable with airport procedures. The pieces clicked together in his mind, forming a narrative that justified his growing hostility. "Airport security vulnerabilities," Kowalski repeated slowly, his voice taking on an edge. "That's interesting." "Very interesting." Sarah Mitchell continued her assigned tasks nearby, processing other passengers without paying much attention to the developing situation. She'd seen Kowalski conduct additional screenings before and knew better than to interfere with a supervisor's methods, especially when she was still relatively new to the job. Marcus began to sense the shift in atmosphere, the way Kowalski's questions carried implications beyond their surface meaning. "It's a high school project. My computer science teacher helped me develop it for the national science competition." "High school project?" Kowalski said with obvious skepticism. "And you just happened to choose airport security as your topic?" "My father works in airport security. I thought it would be interesting to—" "Your father works in airport security?" Kowalski interrupted, his suspicion deepening. "What's his name? What airport?" Marcus hesitated, suddenly unsure whether mentioning his father's actual position would help or hurt his situation. "James Williams. He works for TSA." The name meant nothing to Kowalski, who dealt primarily with local operations and rarely interacted with higher-level management. To him, it sounded like another convenient lie from a kid who seemed to have an answer for everything. "Sure he does," Kowalski muttered under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Mitchell, I need you to conduct a thorough search of this bag. Look for anything unusual." Sarah nodded and began methodically examining Marcus's backpack, removing his conference materials, change of clothes, and presentation notes. She laid everything out on the metal table with mechanical efficiency, following procedures without question or commentary. Marcus watched his belongings being scrutinized, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the interaction. Other passengers glanced over curiously as they collected their items and moved toward their gates, some pausing to observe the extended screening. "This is really unnecessary," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful. "I have a flight to catch, and I'm going to be late for my conference registration." "You'll catch your flight when I'm satisfied you're not a security risk," Kowalski replied sharply. "And right now, your story has more holes than Swiss cheese." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, transforming what should have been routine additional screening into something far more serious and personal. "Holes in my story?" Marcus's voice carried a note of disbelief. "I'm telling you the truth. I can show you my conference registration, my hotel reservation, my presentation materials." "Anyone can fake documents these days," Kowalski interrupted, his tone growing more aggressive. "Especially someone who claims to be an expert in cybersecurity. Tell me again why a high school kid is traveling alone to Chicago with thousands of dollars worth of electronics." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "They're not thousands of dollars. My laptop is 3 years old and my headphones were a birthday gift. I'm 16, not 6. I'm allowed to travel alone." "Are you?" Kowalski stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Because, in my experience, teenagers who travel alone with expensive equipment and stories about researching airport security are usually up to something." Sarah Mitchell continued her methodical search of Marcus's belongings, pulling out his presentation folder and flipping through the pages. Charts, graphs, and technical diagrams filled the papers, all related to cybersecurity protocols. She glanced at them briefly before setting them aside, more focused on completing her assigned task than understanding the content. "What's this?" Kowalski snatched the presentation folder from the table, scanning the technical diagrams with suspicion. "These look like blueprints of security systems." "They're not blueprints," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. "They're flowcharts showing how cybersecurity protocols work. It's academic research, not some criminal plan." "Academic research," Kowalski repeated mockingly. "Right. And I suppose you just coincidentally chose to research the exact systems you're trying to bypass right now?" The accusation was so absurd that Marcus almost laughed, but the seriousness in Kowalski's eyes stopped him cold. "I'm not trying to bypass anything. I went through your metal detector. I submitted to additional screening. I've answered all your questions. You've given me a bunch of convenient stories that don't add up." Kowalski cut him off. "A teenager researching airport security, traveling alone to present at some conference, father who supposedly works for TSA, but I've never heard of him." Other passengers had begun to take notice of the escalating confrontation. A businessman in a wrinkled suit paused while collecting his belongings, openly staring at the scene. A young mother with 2 small children hurried past, pulling her kids closer to her side. Marcus became aware of the growing audience and felt heat rise in his cheeks. "You can call TSA headquarters and verify my father's employment. James Williams, Director of Operations." "Director of Operations?" Kowalski's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Now you're telling me your daddy is some big-shot director? Kid, you need to pick better lies." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd grown up hearing that tone, that dismissive assumption that a young black man couldn't possibly be connected to legitimate authority. His father had warned him about this moment, but experiencing it firsthand felt different than any preparation could have provided. "I'm not lying," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "My name is Marcus Williams. I'm 16 years old. I live in Atlanta, and I'm traveling to Chicago for a legitimate academic conference. Everything I've told you is the truth." "Sure it is," Kowalski said, motioning to Sarah. "Mitchell, I want a full pat-down. This kid is hiding something." Sarah looked up from the bag search, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time. "Sir, he's already been through the metal detector and—" "I don't care what he's been through," Kowalski snapped. "I'm telling you to conduct a pat-down. Are you questioning my authority?" "No, sir," Sarah replied quickly, her training overriding any personal reservations. She moved toward Marcus with latex gloves, her expression apologetic but compliant. Marcus stepped back instinctively. "This is ridiculous. You can't just search me because you don't believe my story." "I can search anyone I deem a security risk," Kowalski said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And right now, you're exhibiting all the signs of someone who's not being truthful about their intentions." "What signs?" Marcus demanded, his composure finally cracking. "What exactly have I done that makes you think I'm lying?" "Your whole attitude," Kowalski replied. "Too calm, too prepared, too many convenient answers. In my 12 years doing this job, I've learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts are telling me you're not who you say you are." The pat-down proceeded with clinical efficiency, Sarah following standard procedures, while Kowalski watched intently. Marcus submitted to the search with gritted teeth, acutely aware of the passengers walking past, some stopping to stare at the spectacle. "Nothing unusual," Sarah reported after completing the search. Kowalski's jaw tightened. "Check his bag again. More thoroughly this time." Sarah returned to Marcus's backpack, this time examining every pocket, every seam, every potential hiding place. She removed his clothes, shook out his toiletry bag, and even checked the lining of the backpack itself. "Sir, there's nothing here," she said after several minutes. "Just personal items and conference materials." "There's got to be something," Kowalski muttered, his frustration evident. He grabbed Marcus's phone from the bin. "What's the passcode?" "You can't search my phone without a warrant," Marcus said, his knowledge of his rights finally kicking in. "I can if I suspect you're involved in suspicious activity," Kowalski replied. "What are you hiding on there?" "Nothing." "But that doesn't mean you have the right—" "I have every right," Kowalski interrupted. "You're in my airport, under my jurisdiction, and I'm determining whether you pose a security threat." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. Every answer he gave seemed to make Kowalski more suspicious, every assertion of his rights interpreted as defiance. The businessman who had been watching finally collected his belongings and left, shaking his head in disgust. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his growing panic. "I am the supervisor on duty," Kowalski replied with satisfaction. "And I'm making the determination that you need to be detained for further questioning." The word detained hit Marcus like a physical blow. Detained? On what grounds? Suspicious behavior, inconsistent story, and failure to cooperate with security procedures, Kowalski rattled off. "Mitchell, call for a detention escort." Sarah hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over her radio. "Sir, are you sure? He hasn't done anything." "He's done plenty," Kowalski cut her off. "Make the call." As Sarah reluctantly reached for her radio, Marcus realized that his routine flight to Chicago had just become a nightmare with no clear end in sight. The TSA detention room was a windowless box painted institutional beige, furnished with nothing more than a metal table bolted to the floor and two uncomfortable plastic chairs. Marcus sat in one of them, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as he tried to process what had just happened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel surreal and nightmare-like. He stared at the clock on the wall. 2:47 p.m. His flight was scheduled to depart at 4:15, and he was supposed to be at the gate by now, reviewing his presentation notes one final time. Instead, he was trapped in this sterile room, his phone confiscated, his belongings scattered across a security table somewhere outside. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself. "This literally cannot be happening." The door had a small window, and Marcus could see TSA agents walking past in the corridor beyond. None of them looked in his direction. To them, he was just another problem contained and filed away, no longer their concern. Meanwhile, back at the security checkpoint, Kowalski was typing his incident report with the satisfaction of a job well done. Each keystroke felt like vindication of his professional instincts, proof that his 12 years of experience had paid off once again. Suspicious individual, age approximately 16, traveling alone with expensive electronic equipment, he typed. Subject claimed to be conducting research on airport security vulnerabilities. Story inconsistent and implausible. Subject became agitated when questioned and refused to cooperate with standard security procedures. He paused, considering his next words carefully. The report needed to sound objective and professional, even though his gut told him this kid was trouble. Based on subject's evasive responses, claims of researching airport security systems, and overall suspicious demeanor, I made the determination that detention was necessary for further investigation. Subject may be involved in reconnaissance activities targeting airport security infrastructure. Sarah Mitchell watched Kowalski type from her position at the bag search station, a growing knot of unease in her stomach. She'd completed hundreds of bag searches in her 2 years with TSA, and Marcus's belongings had been the most ordinary she'd seen all week. School clothes, conference materials, toiletries, and a teenager's collection of electronic devices. Nothing remotely suspicious. But Kowalski was her supervisor, and she'd learned early in her career that questioning superior officers was a quick way to find herself looking for new employment. She focused on processing the next passenger in line, trying to push her doubts aside. The businessman who had witnessed the confrontation was now seated at his gate, still shaking his head in disbelief. He pulled out his phone and began typing a text to his wife. Just saw the most ridiculous thing at airport security. TSA agent basically arrested a kid for no reason I could see. Kid was polite, compliant, had all his documents. Agent just seemed to have it out for him from the start. He hesitated before hitting send, then added, "Kid was black. Agent was white. Didn't sit right with me at all." At gate B12, other passengers were beginning to notice that boarding for the Chicago flight would begin soon. An elderly woman checked her watch and gathered her carry-on bag, while a group of college students debated whether they had time to grab coffee before their row was called. None of them knew that one of their fellow passengers was currently sitting in a detention room, watching his opportunity to present his research slip away, minute by minute. Back in the detention room, Marcus tried to stay calm by focusing on practical concerns. His conference registration was non-refundable. His hotel room was prepaid. His presentation was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and there were college recruiters planning to attend specifically to hear his cybersecurity research. More importantly, his father would expect him to call when he landed. Director Williams was probably in meetings all afternoon, but he always made time to check on Marcus's safe arrival. When that call didn't come, when Marcus didn't respond to texts, his father would start to worry. The thought of his father's concern made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. James Williams had worked his entire career to build respect and authority within TSA, breaking barriers and proving himself at every level. How would it look if his own son was detained by TSA agents who didn't believe his story? "I have to get out of here," Marcus said aloud, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "I have to find a way to make them listen." But the door remained locked, and the clock kept ticking toward his missed flight and ruined opportunity. Kowalski finished his report and leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his work. In his experience, thorough documentation was the key to successful law enforcement. When this kid's story eventually fell apart, and Kowalski was certain it would, his detailed report would show that he'd followed proper procedures and trusted his professional instincts. He glanced toward the detention area and allowed himself a small smile. Another potential threat neutralized, another victory for airport security. His supervisor would be impressed with his initiative and attention to detail. What Kowalski didn't know was that his career was about to encounter the most powerful obstacle he'd ever faced. And it was sitting in that detention room, growing more determined with each passing minute to prove his innocence and reclaim his freedom. The clock on the detention room wall now read 4:20 p.m. Marcus had watched his flight time come and go, along with any hope of making it to Chicago for the evening registration session. He'd been sitting in the same uncomfortable plastic chair for over an hour and a half, with no food, no water, and no communication with the outside world. His stomach growled loudly in the silence, reminding him that he'd skipped lunch to arrive at the airport early. The fluorescent lights continued their relentless humming, creating a headache that pounded behind his eyes. Every few minutes, he could hear footsteps in the corridor outside, but no one stopped to check on him or provide any updates about his situation. "Excuse me," Marcus called out when he heard approaching footsteps. "Excuse me, I need to use the bathroom." The footsteps paused, then continued without response. Marcus slumped back in his chair, frustration building in his chest like pressure in a steam kettle. He'd never felt so powerless, so completely at the mercy of a system that seemed designed to ignore his basic human dignity. At the security checkpoint, Kowalski was briefing the evening shift supervisor about the day's notable incidents. He pulled up Marcus's file on his computer screen, pointing to the various red flags he'd documented. 16-year-old traveling alone, claimed to be researching airport security vulnerabilities, had expensive electronics. Story kept changing when I pressed him on details, Kowalski explained to his colleague. Classic signs of reconnaissance activity. Could be part of a larger operation. "You think he's working with someone?" the evening supervisor asked, reviewing the report. "Has to be. Kids don't just decide to research airport security on their own. Someone's pulling his strings, using him because he looks innocent." Kowalski's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd connected all the dots. "I've got him in detention until we can figure out who's behind this." The evening supervisor nodded approvingly. "Good catch. Better safe than sorry with these types of situations." Meanwhile, 50 miles away in downtown Atlanta, Director James Williams was wrapping up a long day of budget meetings and personnel reviews. He glanced at his phone as he gathered his papers, expecting to see the usual text from Marcus confirming his safe arrival in Chicago. Instead, his screen showed no new messages. "That's odd," he thought. Marcus was religiously punctual about check-in calls, a habit James had instilled in him from their first solo travel experience years ago. He pulled up Marcus's flight information, landed on time at 3:45 p.m. Chicago time. Marcus should have texted by now. James tried calling Marcus's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail after one ring. "Hey, son, just checking that you made it safely. Give me a call when you get this message. Love you." He tried again 10 minutes later with the same result. A small knot of concern began forming in his stomach. Back in the detention room, Marcus had begun pacing the small space, trying to work off his nervous energy and growing anger. 3 steps to the wall, turn around, 3 steps back. The repetitive motion helped him think, helped him strategize about how to get out of this situation. He'd been polite and cooperative, exactly as his father had always taught him. He'd answered every question truthfully, provided all requested documentation, submitted to searches without complaint. None of it had mattered. Kowalski had already decided Marcus was guilty of something, and every piece of evidence to the contrary only seemed to reinforce that predetermined conclusion. "I need to make a phone call," Marcus said loudly, hoping someone would hear him through the door. "I'm entitled to a phone call." Silence. He tried again, louder this time. "I need to contact my father. I'm supposed to check in when I travel." Still nothing. The bureaucratic machinery that had swallowed him seemed designed to operate without any input from its victims. Forms were filed, reports were written, procedures were followed, but the actual human being at the center of it all might as well have been invisible. James Williams tried calling Marcus a 3rd time, his concern deepening when the call again went straight to voicemail. He pulled up the airline's website and confirmed that the flight had arrived on schedule with no delays or incidents reported. So, where was his son? He tried calling the hotel where Marcus was supposed to be staying. "Westin, Chicago downtown. How may I help you?" "Hello, I'm trying to reach my son, Marcus Williams. He should have checked in this afternoon." "Let me check our reservations." "I show a reservation for Marcus Williams, but he hasn't checked in yet." James felt his stomach drop. "Are you sure? His flight landed over an hour ago." "Yes, sir, I'm certain. The reservation is still showing as pending arrival." James hung up and immediately dialed TSA headquarters. Something was wrong, and his parental instincts were screaming that Marcus was in trouble. As the head of the organization, he had resources and contacts that could help him track down his son's whereabouts. But first, he needed to confirm his worst fear, that Marcus had never made it out of the airport. In the detention room, Marcus had stopped pacing and was now sitting with his head in his hands, the reality of his situation finally sinking in completely. He wasn't just missing his conference registration. He wasn't just inconvenienced by an overzealous security agent. He was being held against his will, with no clear path to freedom and no way to contact anyone who might help him. The system had swallowed him whole, and he was beginning to understand that proving his innocence might be far more difficult than he'd ever imagined. Block 5. Complications. By 6:30 p.m., Marcus had been in detention for nearly 4 hours. The plastic chair had become torture, his back aching from the awkward position he'd been forced to maintain. His throat was dry, his head pounded from dehydration and stress, and his stomach cramped with hunger. He'd asked repeatedly for water, for food, for basic human necessities, but his requests disappeared into the bureaucratic void. "Please," he called out again when he heard footsteps in the corridor. "I just need some water. I haven't had anything to drink in hours." The footsteps paused outside his door. Marcus heard the jingle of keys, and hope flared in his chest as the lock turned. A TSA agent he hadn't seen before opened the door. A woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. "You've been asking for water?" she said, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am. For hours. And I really need to use the bathroom." She sighed and stepped aside. "Come on. Bathroom first, then we'll see about water." Marcus stood on unsteady legs, his body stiff from sitting motionless for so long. The bathroom was just down the hall, a small institutional space with harsh lighting and the smell of industrial disinfectant. It was the first privacy he'd had all day, and he splashed cold water on his face, trying to clear his head. "You get 5 minutes," the agent said when he emerged. Then back to the room. "Ma'am, can I please make a phone call? I'm supposed to check in with my father when I travel. He's going to be worried sick." She hesitated, studying his face. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus Williams. I'm 16. I was just trying to catch a flight to Chicago for an academic conference." "Academic conference?" Her expression softened slightly. "What kind of conference?" "National High School Science Competition. I was supposed to present my cybersecurity research." Marcus's voice cracked with exhaustion and frustration. "My presentation is tomorrow morning. I've been working on it for months." The agent, her badge read Patterson, looked genuinely troubled. "Agent Kowalski said you were suspicious, researching airport security systems." "It's a school project," Marcus said desperately. "My computer science teacher helped me develop it. My father works for TSA. He knows about my research. Please, just let me call him." Patterson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "One phone call. 5 minutes." She led him to a small office and dialed his father's number on the desk phone, putting it on speaker so she could monitor the conversation. Marcus's hands shook as he waited for the connection. At his office in downtown Atlanta, James Williams was in full panic mode. He'd spent the last 2 hours making calls, pulling strings, and using every contact in his network to track down his son's whereabouts. The airline confirmed Marcus had checked in for his flight, but never boarded. Airport security cameras showed him entering the TSA checkpoint, but no footage of him leaving. His phone rang just as he was grabbing his car keys. "James Williams." "Dad?" Marcus's voice was small and strained. "Dad, I'm in trouble." James felt his heart stop. "Marcus? Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I'm still at Atlanta Airport. TSA detained me. They think I'm some kind of security threat because of my research project." Marcus's words tumbled out in a rush. Agent Kowalski accused me of lying, said my story doesn't make sense, and they've had me locked up for hours. James was already moving toward the elevator, his phone pressed to his ear. The name Kowalski triggered something in his memory. He'd seen incident reports from Atlanta with that signature, usually involving what the agent described as suspicious activities that turned out to be nothing. But this was his son. Detained? On what grounds? James's voice was dangerously quiet as he jabbed the elevator button. He said I was suspicious because I'm researching airport security. He didn't believe I was going to a conference, didn't believe you work for TSA, didn't believe anything I told him. Marcus's voice broke. Dad, they won't give me food or water. I've been sitting in this room for 4 hours. I missed my flight. I'm going to miss my presentation. Son, listen to me carefully, James interrupted, stepping into the elevator. Are you hurt? Have they mistreated you physically? No, sir, but I'm coming to get you right now. I'm leaving my office and I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't say anything else to anyone until I arrive. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Put whoever's supervising this call on the phone. Patterson took the receiver off speaker and picked it up. This is Agent Patterson. This is Director James Williams, head of TSA operations. I want my son released immediately and moved to a secure waiting area until I arrive. Patterson's face went white. Director Williams? Sir, Agent Kowalski is the one who… I don't care who made the initial decision. How long has my son been in detention? 4 hours, sir, since approximately 2:30 this afternoon. James's jaw clenched as he exited the elevator and headed for his car. 4 hours. A 16-year-old boy held for 4 hours without food, water, or communication. Agent Patterson, I'm going to ask you to document everything that has happened today, because there's going to be a full investigation. Yes, sir. I'll take care of Marcus immediately. I'll be there in 30 minutes. And Patterson? If anyone tries to interfere with my son's release or asks him any more questions before I arrive, they'll be answering to me personally. As James started his car and pulled out of the parking garage, he was already planning the conversation he would have with Agent Kowalski. A conversation that would end the man's career and send shockwaves through the entire TSA system. 25 miles of Atlanta traffic had never seemed so far. Block 6, Emotional Dilemmas. The glass doors of the TSA administrative office slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Director James Williams strode through the checkpoint area like a man possessed, his expensive suit and authoritative bearing causing every agent in sight to freeze mid-task. His face was a mask of controlled fury that promised consequences for someone. Where is Agent Kowalski? His voice cut through the ambient noise of the airport like a blade. And where is my son? The duty supervisor, a nervous man named Henderson, practically stumbled over himself to respond. Director Williams, sir. Agent Kowalski is… I didn't ask for his life story. I asked where he is. Now. Break room, sir. But your son is in Office 3 with Agent Patterson. He's been released from detention as you ordered. James was already moving toward the office, but he stopped and turned back to Henderson with eyes that could have melted steel. Released from detention? My 16-year-old son was in detention? For how long? Henderson's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. 4 hours, sir. Since approximately 2:30 this afternoon. 4 hours. James repeated the words slowly, as if trying to process their meaning. And in those 4 hours, did anyone think to verify his story? Did anyone think to call TSA headquarters to confirm that James Williams has a son named Marcus? Sir, Agent Kowalski handles his own investigations. Get Kowalski. Right now. And clear this area of unnecessary personnel. Meanwhile, In Office 3, Marcus sat with Agent Patterson, still nursing the bottle of water she'd given him. He looked up as footsteps approached the door, recognizing the purposeful stride of his father, even through the walls. The door opened, and James Williams entered, his presence filling the small space with barely contained energy. Marcus saw his father's face, the professional mask cracking to reveal raw paternal fury, and felt his own emotional control finally give way. "Dad," he said simply, and his voice broke on the single word. James crossed the room and pulled his son into a fierce embrace, feeling the tremor in Marcus's shoulders as the teenager finally allowed himself to break down. Over Marcus's head, he took in his son's appearance, the exhaustion, the stress lines around his eyes, the way his clothes were wrinkled from hours in an uncomfortable chair. "I'm here, son. I'm here. It's over," James whispered, but his eyes remained fixed on Agent Patterson, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "I tried to tell them," Marcus said against his father's shoulder. "I told them exactly what you taught me to say, but it didn't matter. He'd already decided I was guilty of something." James held his son tighter, feeling the full weight of his parental failure. He'd taught Marcus how to navigate airport security, how to be respectful and compliant, how to follow procedures, but he'd never prepared him for malicious prejudice disguised as professional duty. "Agent Patterson," James said, his voice deadly quiet, "I want you to tell me exactly what happened to my son. Every detail." Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Agent Kowalski initiated the secondary screening. He felt the subject, your son, was exhibiting suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior? Such as?" "Well, he was traveling alone with expensive electronics, and he claimed to be researching airport security systems." "Claimed to be researching." "Agent Patterson, are you aware that my son has been working on a cybersecurity project for the National High School Science Competition? Are you aware that I've personally reviewed his research and given him permission to use TSA protocols as a case study?" Patterson's face went pale. "No, sir, I wasn't aware of that." "Of course you weren't, because no one bothered to verify anything. No one made a single phone call." James's voice was rising despite his efforts to maintain control. "Instead, you held a child, my child, in detention for 4 hours without food, without water, without basic human dignity." Marcus pulled back from his father's embrace, wiping his eyes. "Dad, it's not Agent Patterson's fault. She's the one who finally let me call you. She's the one who got me out of that room." James looked at his son with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Even after everything he'd endured, Marcus was still trying to be fair, still trying to see the good in people. It was exactly the kind of character James had tried to instill in him, but it also made his son vulnerable to the very system James had spent his career trying to reform. "Where is Agent Kowalski?" James asked Patterson. "Break room, sir. But, Director Williams, I think you should know. He's been telling everyone that he followed proper procedures. He's not showing any remorse for what happened." James felt something cold and final settle in his chest. "Agent Patterson, I want you to escort my son to the VIP lounge and make sure he has food and whatever else he needs. I have a conversation to have with Agent Kowalski." "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "don't let this destroy your career. I'll be okay." James looked at his son, this remarkable young man who was more concerned about his father's professional reputation than his own trauma, and made a decision that would define the rest of his time as director. "Son, some things are more important than careers. And protecting you and every other innocent person who walks through these checkpoints is one of them." Block 7. Escalation. James Williams walked through the TSA administrative area with measured steps, his fury now crystallized into something far more dangerous than explosive anger: cold, calculated determination. Every agent he passed seemed to shrink under his gaze, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing the calm before a career-ending storm. The break room door stood slightly ajar, and through it, James could hear Kowalski's voice holding court with several other agents. "Look, I've been doing this job for 12 years, Kowalski was saying. I know suspicious behavior when I see it. Kid had all the classic signs, too calm, too prepared, stories that were just a little too convenient. You can't tell me that's not textbook reconnaissance activity." "But Derek, his father is some big shot at TSA, another voice said uncertainly. "So he says. Anyone can claim their daddy works for the government. I've heard that story 100 times. Kowalski's voice carried absolute confidence. "When this investigation is over, they're going to see that I followed proper procedures and protected airport security." James pushed the door open and stepped inside. The conversation died instantly as 5 TSA agents turned to face the tall, imposing man in the expensive suit. Their expressions ranged from nervous curiosity to outright confusion, none of them immediately recognizing him. "I'm looking for Agent Kowalski," James said, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. "That's me," Kowalski replied, his confidence intact as he stood to face what he assumed was some mid-level administrator. "And you are?" "James Williams, Director of TSA Operations." James watched as the color drained from Kowalski's face. "I believe you detained my son today?" The silence that followed was so complete that the hum of the vending machine seemed deafening. Kowalski's mouth opened and closed several times before any words emerged. Your son?" he stammered. "Marcus Williams, 16 years old, traveling to Chicago for an academic conference. Ring any bells?" Kowalski's professional confidence crumbled, like a house of cards. "Sir, I had no idea. He said his father worked for TSA, but I thought he was lying." "You thought he was lying?" James stepped closer, his presence filling the small break room. "Agent Kowalski, I want you to explain to me, in detail, what specific behaviors made my son suspicious enough to warrant 4 hours of detention." The other agents in the room began quietly edging toward the exit, but James's voice stopped them cold. "Everyone stays. I want witnesses to this conversation." Kowalski was visibly sweating now, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Sir, the subject, your son, was traveling alone with expensive electronic equipment, claimed to be researching airport security vulnerabilities, and when I questioned him, his answers seemed rehearsed." "Rehearsed? You mean polite and articulate?" "Well, no, sir, I mean—" "Agent Kowalski, are you aware that Marcus Williams has been working on his cybersecurity project for 6 months? Are you aware that his research has been cleared through proper channels, and that I personally reviewed his methodology?" Kowalski's face went from pale to green. "How was I supposed to know that, sir?" "By doing your job. By making a single phone call to verify his story, before holding a child in detention for 4 hours. James's voice began to rise. "By treating him like a human being, instead of a predetermined threat." One of the other agents cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, if I may, I witnessed part of the interaction. The young man was very polite and cooperative throughout the process. And yet, Agent Kowalski felt the need to escalate the situation to detention. Why?" All eyes turned back to Kowalski, who was now openly panicking. I thought his story was too convenient. A teenager researching airport security, traveling alone, expensive equipment. It all seemed suspicious." "Suspicious?" James repeated the word with deadly precision. "Agent Kowalski, in your 12 years of experience, have you ever detained a white teenager for having expensive electronics and traveling alone?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Kowalski's mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds. That's not... I don't profile based on race. Don't you? James stepped even closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you saw a confident young black man and decided he couldn't possibly be legitimate. You saw expensive electronics and assumed theft. You heard about cybersecurity research and assumed criminal intent. Sir, that's not fair. What's not fair is what you did to my son. James's professional control finally cracked. You held a 16-year-old boy in a concrete room for 4 hours. No food, no water, no communication with the outside world. You treated him like a terrorist because he had the audacity to be young, black, and articulate. The room fell silent except for the electrical hum of the fluorescent lights. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the end of a career and possibly the beginning of something much larger. Agent Kowalski, James said, his voice returning to deadly calm, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Clear out your locker, turn in your badge, and security will escort you from the building. Sir, you can't. This isn't fair. I was doing my job. Your job was protecting airport security, not abusing your authority to terrorize innocent children. James turned toward the door, then paused. And Kowalski? Next time you want to claim someone's story is too convenient, you might want to make sure their father isn't the person who signs your paychecks. As James left the break room, his phone was already buzzing with calls from headquarters, and he could hear Kowalski's panicked voice behind him, trying to explain to his colleagues how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. Within minutes of James Williams leaving the break room, the Atlanta airport's administrative offices erupted into controlled chaos. Airport General Manager Patricia Collins was already on her second emergency phone call when James arrived at her office, his expression making it clear that this conversation would determine the future of several careers. Director Williams, Collins said, hanging up abruptly. I just heard about the incident with your son. I want to assure you that we're taking this matter extremely seriously. Are you? James interrupted, settling into the chair across from her desk with the calm of a man who held all the cards. Because, from what I can tell, this incident represents a complete breakdown of training, supervision, and basic human decency within your TSA operations. Collins shifted uncomfortably. Sir, Agent Kowalski has been suspended pending investigation, and we're reviewing all the procedures. Agent Kowalski is just the symptom, not the disease. James leaned forward. I want to know how many other innocent travelers have been subjected to this kind of treatment. I want to know why none of his supervisors intervened during a 4-hour detention of a minor. And I want to know what systemic changes you're going to implement to ensure this never happens again. Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge where Marcus waited, Agent Patterson sat across from him, struggling with her own complicity in the day's events. She watched as Marcus picked at a sandwich, still visibly shaken despite being reunited with his father. Marcus, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up when I saw what was happening. Marcus looked up, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. Why didn't you? The simple question hit Patterson like a physical blow. Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of challenging authority. Afraid of rocking the boat. She paused, then added with painful honesty, and because it wasn't happening to someone I cared about. But it was happening to someone, Marcus replied. It was happening to me. Back in Collins's office, James was systematically dismantling the administrative structure that had enabled his son's abuse. His phone remained on silent as he focused entirely on the woman across from him. I want Kowalski's employment terminated, not just suspended, he said. I want every agent who witnessed this incident interviewed by Internal Affairs. And I want a complete review of Atlanta's screening statistics for the past year. broken down by demographic categories. Director Williams, surely you understand that personnel decisions require due process. Due process? James's voice carried a dangerous edge. My son was denied due process for 4 hours. He was presumed guilty and treated like a criminal without a shred of evidence. Don't talk to me about due process. Collins nodded nervously. Of course, sir. What else do you need from us? Full accountability, immediate policy changes, mandatory retraining for all security personnel, and a personal apology to my son from every supervisor who allowed this to happen. James stood from his chair, his presence filling the room. Ms. Collins, this incident doesn't leave this airport. No media, no publicity, no corporate damage control. We handle this internally, professionally, and thoroughly. Is that understood? Absolutely, Director Williams. Complete discretion. As James left Collins's office, he could hear her already making calls, implementing changes that should have been standard procedure years ago. But his focus had shifted to his son and the healing process that would need to begin. In the VIP lounge, Marcus looked up as his father returned, relief flooding his features. Dad, is it over? James sat beside his son, seeing not just the teenager who'd been traumatized today, but the young man who would carry this experience for the rest of his life. The immediate crisis is over. Kowalski's career is finished, and there are going to be significant changes to how TSA operates. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about other people this might have happened to. People who don't have a father who can make phone calls and fix things. James felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. His son had been forced to grow up in the space of 4 hours, had learned firsthand that the world wasn't always fair or just. But Marcus was choosing to use that painful lesson to help others. That's exactly why we're going to make sure this never happens again, James said. Not just here, but at every airport in the country. Your experience today is going to change how TSA trains its agents, how we supervise screening operations, and how we handle complaints. Marcus met his father's eyes with steady determination. Good. Then maybe something positive can come from all this. As father and son sat in the quiet of the VIP lounge, both of them understood that the boy who had walked into Atlanta Airport that morning was gone forever, replaced by a young man who had seen the worst of institutional prejudice and chosen to fight back through systematic change rather than public outrage. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time since this nightmare started, James Williams felt confident that his son's suffering would lead to meaningful reform that would protect countless other travelers from experiencing the same injustice. 2 hours later, James Williams sat in the airport's main conference room with a dozen TSA supervisors, airport administrators, and human resources personnel arrayed around the polished table. The atmosphere was tense, everyone understanding that careers hung in the balance of what would be decided in this room. Let me be absolutely clear about what happened today, James began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. A 16-year-old honor student was detained for 4 hours based on nothing more than racial profiling and institutional prejudice. This isn't a training issue or a procedural oversight. This is a fundamental failure of leadership. Deputy Administrator Sarah Chen, no relation to the TSA agent, shifted uncomfortably as she reviewed the incident report. Director Williams, while we absolutely condemn Agent Kowalski's actions, we need to be careful about making broad, systematic changes based on a single incident. A single incident? James's voice cut through the room like a blade. How many other single incidents have there been? How many other travelers have been subjected to extended detention without cause? How many complaints have been filed and ignored? The silence that followed was telling. Everyone in the room knew there had been other incidents, other complaints, other families who hadn't had the resources or connections to fight back. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the VIP lounge, Marcus was on the phone with his computer science teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, explaining why he wouldn't be presenting at the National Science Competition. "Marcus, I'm so sorry this happened to you," Mr. Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with concern. "But you know what? Your research is solid. We can submit it for publication even without the conference presentation." "It's not about the research anymore, Mr. Rodriguez," Marcus said quietly. "It's about what this means for everyone else who looks like me when they travel." "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts the way his father had taught him. "I had every advantage possible. Educated parents, middle-class background, articulate speech, perfect documentation. And none of that mattered. If this can happen to me, what happens to teenagers who don't have those advantages?" Back in the conference room, James was implementing sweeping changes with the efficiency of a man who had spent years preparing for this moment. Effective immediately, all secondary screenings lasting longer than 30 minutes require supervisor approval, he announced. All detentions of minors require parental notification within 1 hour. And I want body cameras on every TSA agent by the end of next month. "Sir, the budget implications alone," one administrator began. "I don't care about budget implications. I care about civil rights violations happening under my watch." James's tone brooked no argument. "We're also implementing mandatory bias training for all personnel, quarterly reviews of screening statistics broken down by demographics, and a new complaint process that bypasses local management." Agent Patterson, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, finally spoke up. "Director Williams, what about agents who witness inappropriate conduct but don't report it?" James fixed her with a steady gaze. "Agent Patterson, that's an excellent question. What do you think should happen to agents who stand by and watch civil rights violations occur?" Patterson straightened in her chair, understanding that this was her moment of reckoning. "They should face consequences, sir. Silence makes us complicit." "Agreed. Anyone who witnesses inappropriate conduct and fails to report it will face disciplinary action up to and including termination." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. James was essentially requiring every TSA agent to police their colleagues, creating a system of accountability that had never existed before. Deputy Administrator Chen cleared her throat. "Director Williams, these changes are quite extensive. Perhaps we should phase them in over time." "There's no time, Deputy Administrator. Every day we delay implementing these reforms, more innocent people suffer the same treatment my son endured today." James stood from his chair, signaling that the discussion phase was over. "These changes go into effect immediately at Atlanta, and they'll be rolled out nationwide within 60 days. As the meeting broke up, James felt the weight of what he'd just set in motion. He wasn't just reforming TSA procedures. He was declaring war on the institutional racism that had allowed his son to be brutalized. There would be pushback, resistance, and political consequences he couldn't foresee. But when he returned to the VIP lounge and saw Marcus sitting quietly, still processing the trauma of his ordeal, James knew he'd made the right choice. His son had been forced to grow up in a single afternoon, had learned harsh truths about America that no teenager should have to face. "How are you feeling, son?" James asked, settling into the chair beside Marcus. Marcus looked up with eyes that seemed older than his 16 years. "Tired. Angry. But also determined, I guess. What happened to me today can't happen to other kids." "It won't," James promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." As father and son prepared to leave the airport that had become the site of their family's defining moment, both understood that their lives had been fundamentally changed. The systematic reforms James had just implemented would ripple through the entire TSA organization, touching millions of travelers and thousands of agents. But for now, they just wanted to go home and begin the long process of healing from a day that had tested everything they believed about justice, fairness, and the American promise of equal treatment under the law. Climax. 3 weeks later, James Williams stood at the head of a packed conference room in TSA headquarters, facing the largest gathering of airport security personnel in the agency's history. Representatives from every major airport in the country had been summoned to witness what would become known as the Williams Reforms, a complete overhaul of TSA screening procedures born from one teenager's traumatic afternoon. "Today marks the end of business as usual," James began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "For too long, we've operated under the assumption that security and civil rights are competing interests. The detention of my son, Marcus Williams, proved that assumption is not only wrong, it's dangerous." In the audience, former agent Derek Kowalski sat in civilian clothes, his termination having been finalized the previous week. His unemployment benefits had been denied, his security clearance revoked, and his hopes of finding work in law enforcement effectively ended. He stared at his hands, the weight of his destroyed career crushing down on him. "Agent Kowalski made a choice that afternoon," James continued, making direct eye contact with his son's former captor. "He chose to see a confident young black man as a threat rather than a traveler. He chose suspicion over verification. He chose prejudice over procedure. And in making those choices, he violated everything this agency stands for." Marcus Williams, now 17 and standing beside his father, stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice was clear and strong, carrying none of the fear that had marked his ordeal 3 weeks ago. "I want to speak directly to every TSA agent in this room," Marcus said. "When you see a teenager traveling alone, don't assume they're up to something. When you see expensive electronics, don't assume they're stolen. When you hear about cybersecurity research, don't assume criminal intent. See us as individuals, not stereotypes." Agent Patterson, who had been promoted to supervisor following her cooperation with the investigation, felt tears welling in her eyes. She'd watched Marcus's transformation from traumatized victim to articulate advocate, and his courage shamed her for her initial complicity. "The Williams reforms aren't just policy changes," James continued, clicking to the next slide of his presentation. "They're a fundamental shift in how we approach airport security. Body cameras will record every interaction. Supervisors will review every extended screening. Parents will be notified within 1 hour of any minor's detention. And most importantly, silence in the face of abuse will be treated as participation in that abuse." In the back of the room, Airport General Manager Patricia Collins nodded approvingly. The reforms had already shown measurable results at Atlanta. Complaints down 60%, screening times improved, and employee morale surprisingly higher as agents appreciated clear guidelines and accountability. "But policy changes alone aren't enough," James said, his voice growing more passionate. "We need cultural change. We need every agent to understand that they're not just checking bags and scanning IDs. They're serving as the face of American security to millions of travelers. How we treat people reflects who we are as a nation." Former Agent Kowalski stood abruptly and walked toward the exit, unable to bear hearing about the career he'd destroyed through his own prejudice. As he reached the door, James's voice followed him. "Agent Kowalski's termination serves as a reminder that there are consequences for abuse of authority. But more importantly, it demonstrates that change is possible when institutions take responsibility for their failures." The door closed behind Kowalski with finality, punctuating the end of his career and the old way of doing business. Marcus stepped forward again, his composure remarkable for someone so young. "I lost my conference presentation that day, but I gained something more valuable. the knowledge that one person's trauma can become everyone's opportunity for growth. The hours I spent in that detention room were the worst of my life, but they led to changes that will protect countless other travelers. Agent Patterson raised her hand from the audience. Marcus, what would you say to agents who are afraid these reforms will make their jobs harder? Marcus looked directly at her, remembering her role in his detention, but also her eventual courage in helping him. I'd say that treating people with dignity and respect doesn't make your job harder. It makes it meaningful. The goal isn't to make screening easier for bad actors. It's to make sure good people aren't treated like criminals. James felt overwhelming pride as he watched his son address the room with wisdom beyond his years. The boy who had walked into Atlanta Airport that morning had been innocent and trusting. The young man who stood beside him now understood the complexities of institutional power and personal responsibility. These reforms take effect immediately at all major airports, James announced. Training begins next week. Compliance will be monitored and enforced. And to be absolutely clear, any agent who thinks they can continue operating under the old system will find themselves joining Agent Kowalski in the unemployment line. As the meeting concluded, and hundreds of TSA personnel filed out to begin implementing the new procedures, James put his arm around his son's shoulders. The trauma of that afternoon had been transformed into systematic change that would touch millions of lives. Marcus had gotten his justice, not through public humiliation or media outrage, but through the harder, more meaningful work of institutional reform. And Derek Kowalski had received his comeuppance, not just the loss of his job, but the knowledge that his prejudice had catalyzed changes that would prevent future agents from following his example. The battle for dignity and fair treatment was far from over, but in this moment, father and son had won a decisive victory for every traveler who would benefit from the Williams reforms. 6 months later, Marcus Williams walked through the same TSA checkpoint at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. But everything had changed. The agents wore body cameras now, their interactions more professional and respectful. Posted signs explained passenger rights in multiple languages, and a dedicated family assistance desk helped travelers navigate the new procedures. "Next, please," called Agent Patterson, now wearing supervisor stripes on her uniform. She smiled genuinely as Marcus approached her station. "Good morning, Agent Patterson," Marcus said, handing over his boarding pass and ID. "Chicago again, this time for the National Cybersecurity Summit." "Congratulations on your acceptance to MIT," she replied, stamping his documents. "Your father must be incredibly proud." "He is. We both are." Marcus paused, then added quietly, "Thank you for everything you did that day. It mattered." Patterson's eyes grew bright with emotion. "No, Marcus. Thank you. You changed all our lives for the better." As Marcus moved through the metal detector without incident, he reflected on how different this experience felt from his traumatic detention 6 months ago. The screening process was still thorough, but it was conducted with dignity and respect. No one was singled out for looking suspicious, and the new oversight procedures ensured that extended screenings were justified and documented. At a small apartment across town, Derek Kowalski sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on his laptop. 6 months of unemployment had been humbling, to say the least. His savings were nearly depleted, and his applications for security positions were consistently rejected once potential employers discovered his termination from TSA. His phone rang, displaying his sister's number. "Any luck today?" she asked gently. "Same as yesterday. Same as last week." Kowalski's voice carried a resignation that would have been unthinkable during his TSA career. "I've been thinking about what that kid said at the hearing, about seeing people as individuals instead of stereotypes. Derek, you know I love you, but what you did to that boy—" "I know what I did," he interrupted, his voice thick with regret. "I destroyed a child's faith in the system Because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. I lost my career, my reputation, everything. But maybe that's what needed to happen. Meanwhile, at TSA headquarters, James Williams reviewed the latest statistics from airports nationwide. Complaint rates had dropped by 73% since the Williams reforms were implemented. Employee satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement, and screening efficiency had actually increased as agents focused on legitimate security concerns rather than profiling based on appearance. His assistant knocked on the door. "Director Williams, your son's calling." James picked up the phone with a smile. "How's college treating you, son?" "It's incredible, Dad. My cybersecurity professor wants me to present my airport security research to the Department of Homeland Security next month." Marcus's voice carried excitement and maturity in equal measure. He said the reforms you implemented are being studied as a model for institutional change across government agencies. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, not just for your academic success, but for how you've handled everything. You turned your trauma into positive change." "We turned it into positive change," Marcus corrected. "You could have handled that day quietly, made it go away without any publicity. Instead, you chose to fix the system for everyone." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son had grown from a confident teenager into a remarkable young man who understood that true strength came from helping others, not from seeking revenge. "Dad, there's something else," Marcus continued. "I've been accepted into a summer internship program with TSA. They want me to help develop new training protocols based on the Williams reforms. Are you sure you want to work for the organization that put you through that ordeal?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, then answered with the wisdom that had emerged from his painful experience. "That's exactly why I need to work for them. Someone has to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." As James hung up the phone, he looked out his office window at the busy streets of Washington, D.C. Somewhere out there, thousands of travelers were moving through airports with greater dignity and respect because his son had refused to let injustice win. The boy who had been detained in a concrete room had become a catalyst for systematic change that would protect countless others. Agent Patterson finished her shift at Atlanta and drove home to her small house, where she kept a framed photo on her mantelpiece, Marcus Williams at his high school graduation, shaking hands with his father. It served as a daily reminder that courage meant speaking up when it mattered most, even when it was difficult. The Williams reforms had become more than policy changes. They had transformed an entire culture. Airports across America operated with new accountability, new respect for civil rights, and new understanding that security and dignity were not mutually exclusive. Marcus Williams had lost his innocence that terrible afternoon, but he had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that one person's refusal to accept injustice could change the world for everyone who came after. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.